But you said reacting favorably. There's a difference between finally agreeing with what you're saying versus going to the polls and making the change.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah.
So, it shows a certain level of creativity.
Oh, I think I know what you're talking about. How do we get people to realize they are the ones who have the power, not the other way around?
Right.
If the mental is not there, I mean, it's society is still gonna crumble.
Wow, that's a good question.
Welcome once again, guys. It is indeed your boy Mr. Lix, and we are back again for another one on this Brbptv podcast Vibrations, brothers and sisters. I know you guys enjoyed the previous one, but we are back with another guest, and not just another guest, a special guest as well. And we are here with none other than Dr. Thomson Fontaine. So, how are you doing today, man? How are you doing today?
Mr. Lix, I'm well. I'm happy to be with you, and it's great. Certainly looking forward to it.
Normally, when I ask the question, how you doing, I think you are going to embark on a journey, or have been embarking on a journey that might be something I would consider not for the weak, especially when it comes down to the nature of the Caribbean, Dominican, how the economy is running, the governance of Dominica is running. And I would like to ask the question, why would that be? Understanding how certain things are going. And of course, during this podcast, I'm going to break it down in that regard. But why do you choose to do what you're doing and want to do what you're doing for Dominica?
In one word, for love of country. That's well, for words. For love of country. Certainly I grew up always believing that Dominica was a very unique place on this globe, and my travels to more than 80 countries all over the world solidified that view that there is no country like Dominica. And the idea that I came from this small rock, 40 miles by 15 miles across, and that I can actually contribute or give something back is certainly what drives me.
Okay. And it seems like you not just looking at Dominica. We'll talk about Dominica in a moment, but it seems like you also try to utilize your skill set. But before I get into your skill set, you are known as Dr. Thomson Fontaine. Your real name is Dr. Thomson Fontaine, not Thomson Fontaine, right?
Well, some say Thomson, some say Thomson. It's just my mom used to say Thomson.
The title Doctor, we've heard of Skerrit calling himself Doctor, and this kind of, you're a real doctor, right?
Yes.
Can you give us a little background in that regard right there?
Okay, so I'm a doctor by virtue of having a doctorate in economics, in financial and international economics. It took me several years of study between 1993 and 2000. So basically 7 years of study. I did my first degree in K-Ville campus in Barbados in economics. Came back to Dominica, taught for some time, worked at the Ministry of Finance, and then I left in 1993 and did basically 7 years of further studies, master's first, and then a PhD in economics.
And then where did you branch out after you went to school, you got your doctorate? Where did you branch out after that?
So 2 years before I completed my PhD, I got an employment opportunity at the International Monetary Fund. I had applied early, hoping that I will, by the time I'm through, I will get entry. But I was lucky in the sense that the research that I was doing at the time, I was researching currency crisis. And the year was 1998, and the Asian crisis had just broken up and just spread. And that's the exact thing that I was studying. How do we predict where the next crisis is going to take place? Are there certain things that happens in the economy beforehand that will give you an idea as to what will happen? And can you predict with any kind of precision? So I was working on that at the time as my thesis. And fortunately, when I applied to the IMF, hoping that I would go in 2 years' time, in 2000, I got the call up immediately. So I continued my research while at the IMF. So I actually joined the IMF in 1998, 2 years before I actually finished my PhD.
How long did you stay at the IMF?
I stayed there for 13 years. So I was there for 13 years. Worked on basically all of the continents. I worked in the Caribbean. I did a lot of training of central bankers here in the Caribbean. I did a training session, for example, in St. Kitts for central bankers from all the Caribbean region, from Bahamas all the way to Guyana. They came to St. Kitts at the ECCB. I did training for them. I did a similar training in United Arab Emirates for all the Arabic-speaking countries, Kuwait, Iraq, at the time Sudan, United Arab Emirates, basically all of the Arabic-speaking countries there.
Wow.
I did a similar training. But in addition to that, I basically worked as an economist in South Africa, Ghana. I spent a couple of years in Niger, French-speaking Niger. So I know the continent very well, the continent of Africa. But plus, I also worked in Asia. I went to Vietnam. I did work in Vietnam, in Thailand. So I have done a lot of different countries that I've worked on. A world of most countries very different, but it's really pleasant that I can say with certainty that this is one of the best days of my life, really, because I was working in an area that I loved a lot and was able to do that very successfully.
So being outside is not something that is new to you. I know that you work in South Sudan, and the question I would like to ask in that regard is, you mentioned all these countries, but Dominica did not pop out. Do you think that Dominica's time had to come when it's supposed to come? Because right now you're the leader of the opposition in the United Workers' Party. Dominica, what are your thoughts on that? Dominica's time had to come now, or
right?
Opportunities
I think
themselves elsewhere?
Because while I was at the International Monetary Fund, one of the things to prevent a conflict of interest, you're not allowed to work on your own country.
Oh, okay.
For obvious reasons. So because you could be biased towards your country if you're working on policies and so on. So I was not allowed to work on Dominica. But I was more or less stationed on Africa and working on the Asian continent. So for me, it was just a matter of time before I transitioned back into Dominica. That opportunity came in 2012, 2013, when basically that opportunity opened up to contest the elections for the United Workers' Party in 2014. So I was able to leave. I left the IMF at that time, and I spent 1 year at the University of Maryland in the United States, actually teaching.
Okay.
I taught for 1 year, and then I came to Dominica to basically contest the elections of 2014, which is what I did. Of course, you know what happened.
Yeah.
I was told the night that I lost by 21 votes. We went on the recount, and interestingly enough, all of the 21 votes that were supposedly bad ballots were against me.
Interesting.
In a polling station which had an average, going back to 1970, an average of one spoiled ballot every election. But in the 2014 election, there were 21 spoiled ballots, 21 spoiled ballots against me. So it was clear to me that there was a conspiracy to ensure that I did not win that election. And interesting enough, during that recount, I got really, after many hours of counting and trying to convince the workers there that what they were doing was not right. I figured, boy, before I have to do something that's crazy, let me just leave that alone.
Yeah.
So I just left it, and they continued counting. They said finally I lost by 2 votes or 2 or 3 votes. So that was my experience there. Obviously, at that time, we won 6 seats. We did not make the government. And following that, so that was between 2014, 2015, 2016. I started doing work for the UN. I started to do some assignments in Ghana for the United Nations. I did some for Trinidad, and just doing different consultancies across the globe. I did that until 2017 when I got that opportunity in South Sudan. So I've been in South Sudan ever since.
You mentioned something earlier I want to pinpoint. You stated that IMF doesn't want you to work in your country. But if IMF is on the elevation of actually helping countries, and you being a part of IMF to help your country, wouldn't that be an advantage?
Yes, but at the same time, knowing human nature, and it's a very simple thing, because bear in mind what you're doing, all the time you're negotiating different policy measures. Okay, so the feeling is that as a country person, you may have the tendency, I'm not saying that you will, but you may have the tendency to more favorably look at your country. So I think it's just to prevent the conflict of interest issues, which apply basically to all the economies. So there are equally capable economies who would work on the country instead of you doing it.
Now, on the basis of elections itself, I don't know. That has to be one of the toughest things. And I think for Dominica to have free and fair elections, electoral reform must be done. Electoral reform on the basis of what needs to happen, not what you want to happen, I think is vital. How do we get to that point?
It is very simple. The basis of free, fair, and credible elections are the voters' list. Because that is what establishes whether or not you're going to have a credible elections. And our voters' list has, for many election cycles, been polluted. It has not been cleaned. We have on that voters' list persons who have died 20, 30 years ago. You have at the same time persons who have migrated, in some cases probably even 50 years ago, yet their name remains on the voters' list. So that basis, and in fact, that's not necessarily my words, but even the CCJ, which had a chance to look at our 2019 elections, when they looked at the voters' list, they were very clear that that was not correct, that was not right. Because if your voters' list is contaminated, if your voters' list can be manipulated, as it has been in our election cycles, we have examples of people voting on other people's names, people voting in constituencies where they do not belong, and so on. That has happened. We have enough evidence of that, enough cases where it actually happened. So when that happens, you understand that the whole process is tainted. And that's one of the taints that the CCJ spoke about in 2019. So for us, it is very important to have a clean voters list. So when we start to think about electoral reform, the first thing that we must consider is to have a clean voters list.
I agree.
And therefore, the process by which you clean that list becomes critical. Now, most countries in the Caribbean, when they're faced with a situation like we have been faced with in Dominica, they start afresh. They tear up the old list and say, if you want, you have to re-register. Everybody have to re-register. In the draft legislation that we have seen from this government, what they are proposing is confirmation. So they're saying, let us keep the list as it is, and then you simply need to confirm whether or not that name on the list is yours. But here is where we believe the process is flawed, because it does not ask you if you're going to confirm to bring in an identification card. So, for example, I am Thomson Fontaine, but I could show up and say, well, I am James Brown. I just have to sign the paper that I am James Brown. Because I see James Brown, probably I know that James Brown has died a few years ago. I could say, well, I am James Brown. That's me.
This is why the voter ID card is definitely necessary.
Yeah, but then the voter ID card is issued only after. Okay, so I'm saying that in order for that process of confirmation, there should be some form of identification. So if I come forward and I say, I am James Brown, I should be asked to show either a passport, a birth paper, or some other government-issued ID that verifies that I'm James Brown. But as it is now, anybody can claim to be somebody on that list whom they are not. And so that's one area we believe that it's a major loophole, and it's something that we're hoping that before the legislation goes to Parliament that it is cleared. So that is one of the issues. The other major issue, of course, in any kind of reform is the residency criteria. Who is allowed to vote? Now, remember I said that there are thousands of persons on this list who may have died or are overseas. The question is, do they still qualify? In other words, if you've lived in the United States for the past 30 years and you have not returned to Dominica, which is possible. You have Dominicans, even right there in Guadeloupe, they stay 30, 40 years, they don't come back to Dominica.
In the scenes.
So if,
I've met individuals.
Yeah, exactly. So the question is, do these people still qualify to vote in a Dominica election? And the answer clearly is no, because you're not resident. And there's a reason for that. The whole idea of an election is to be able to allow persons to choose a government that will work for them. And if the government does not work for them, then they can remove that government. So they have to have the power to be able to move or keep that government.
Yeah, I agree.
And for a very simple reason, that this government determines their lives. Now, if you're living overseas without having to face the defects or the problems or the failures of a government, it does not help that you are the one now making those choices. And that's what we have been saying. The major flaw in our system now is that you have people in the past 2, 3, 4 election cycles who are making decisions who are not impacted by those decisions that they make in the election move, and that is clearly wrong.
But don't you think that the government knows this?
Well, they know it and they exploit it.
So why would they want to change? I mean, concerning, I think I heard the Prime Minister stating that they want to bypass going to different villages and communities or whatever and having discussions. He just wants to go, and he even stated that if you go to the website, read the stuff, and then message him directly. I remember I stated something like this, but that doesn't mean that anything. I mean, if he wants to push his stuff through the Parliament, he has the majority. Then how is that going to benefit the masses to have free and fair elections?
The Prime Minister so-called winning legacy has been more like a cheating legacy.
Yeah.
So he claims to have a winning legacy, but it's really cheating.
Yeah.
He's been cheating because he's been using persons to come in, in small numbers, as he did, because the time I lost by 2 votes, we had about 52 persons that they brought into my constituency from overseas. All right. So you have that repeatedly in La Plaine, in Cassibros, in St. Joseph.
Yeah.
It's been happening over and over again. Well. Right. So that process of cheating has allowed him to stay in power that long. So it means that if he does not want to relinquish power, he has to keep cheating. And the best way to do it is to try to entrench that cheating in the current legislation.
But that is the key here. How do you solve that problem?
Well, the way you solve it is by Dominicans standing up and saying no. I think the Dominican public need to stand up and be very clear that they will not allow legislation that does not provide for some of the basic things that we spoke about, clean voters list, ensuring the residency criteria. That is something that the Dominican public who will be impacted must stand up and take a stance against.
Don't you think the Dominican people know this? Because it seems like for some reason they might know this, but they don't seem to care. How are you going to get them to be motivated to do that?
I don't think our people, it's not that the people don't care. I think because of the way our society has developed in the past 10, 15 years, there is a great atmosphere of fear in the country. People are afraid. They're afraid. It could be because they're staying in an apartment that does not belong to them. They fear that if they speak, they will lose the access. There are people who are afraid that if they speak too long, they might not be promoted. They might even lose their jobs. So there's a great atmosphere of fear in Dominica. People are afraid to talk. I remember one time, and I will not say what constituency, but I was out doing some work, locally, and I met a person who is a very senior officer in the ministry, I wouldn't say what ministry, in the ministry. So I wanted to talk to that person, but I noticed that when I approached, the person turned. So I was talking to them, and they were a few steps ahead of me. All right, so I'm talking to this individual, and she's talking to me, and every now and then she will turn her head to know that I'm engaging her, but doing it kind of very discreetly. Later on, I learned that she was not prepared to stand up and talk with me because she feared that if she was seen talking to me, that would reach the persons in the ministry and she could be in trouble. That's how far we've come in Dominica, and I'm saying that.
And it's a culture right now.
And it is, So that's the same. And it's for that very same reason why people are fearful to even come out. I mean, sometimes we are very hard on Dominicans and saying, why will they not protest? Why will they not come out? And that is because of that spirit of fear. Not only a spirit of fear, the atmosphere of fear. It is real. People have suffered, and people know cases of persons who have had this very bad experience, and so they're afraid to do it. Because quite frankly, if you're in Dominica, you have a job. And the question is, if you lose this job, what are you going to do?
Exactly, yeah.
If you lose your $300, what are you going to do? If you lose your NEP employment, what are you going to do? So, people need to understand that is the situation in Dominica. It should never have been, but that is what we have in Dominica currently.
Well, the question here is, how do you make people move above that fear? Because if people are so scared of losing their houses, losing their jobs, and they say, because sometimes I tend to do my reactions, and people meet me on the streets from time to time, and they will tell me, boy, Miss Licks, what you're saying, I agree with everything you say. Some individuals who I meet me, and they might challenge me on some of the things I say, and when I clarify for them, they agree with me. And then they will say, but I will still.
There's always a but.
How do we get people to realize they are the ones who have the power. Not the other way around?
Right. I think that for us is where education comes in, and by education I mean just sitting and talking to people. As we were doing before I came to speak to you, we spent about a couple hours, just meeting people in the town, talking to them on a one-on-one basis. What I'm finding is that I've been surprised sometimes at how little a lot of our people know, because you begin to talk about certain things and they can't really appreciate exactly what it is that you're saying, because either they have not thought about it, or they're so busy just trying to make ends meet, trying to survive. They're not bothered with any of this. So the challenge we have before us is to find a way to reach these individuals, and the best way to do that is by one-on-one. Those of us who have the information, going out there, talking to them, and speaking to them, sometimes under the cover of darkness because they don't want to be seen, but doing it in such a way that you can convince them. You know, and I think when the more we have this one-on-one conversations, the more I'm seeing people reacting favorably. So that, I think, is what we have to do.
But you said reacting favorably. There's a difference between finally agreeing with what you're saying versus going to the polls and making the change.
Right. So that is where we have to convince them that the alternative, because that's what we are. The United Workers' Party is an alternative to the Dominica Labour Party. And the idea is to convince them that this alternative that you have is certainly better than what you now have. And part of that process is to explain our plans and programs, what we are planning to do, how we'll revive the economy. Everybody agrees that the economy is not working. Everybody agrees that this year is worse than last year.
Oh, yes.
And the year before and the year before. Everybody understands it has never been that bad. You know, when you have Haitians telling you, pay and tobe, you know things are bad.
Very bad indeed.
Very bad. Pay and tobe, that's the word I've been hearing from the Haitians. You know, so when they tell you that, you know things are bad. And these are some Haitians who have been there for 10, 15 years even.
Yeah, actually met some of the Haitians when they came in, and some of them told me that Dominica was being promoted as Little Miami. And not just Little Miami, that when they come to Dominica, they were going to get jobs. Remember, I'm not sure if you remember, but they actually had a protest. The Haitians were protesting where Kempinski was there asking, where are the jobs that you promised? So that's another situation. And then we have Haitians leaving by the droves. I remember at one point in time, everybody you saw in Picard was a Haitian. We were like, where are the local folks? You know? And now the Haitians seems to be going a number of places to the point where Martinique and Guadeloupe were having problems with that, saying, hey, Dominica, what's going on? Because the Haitians were looking to escape because the economy is not doing well. Now, talking on the basis of the economy now, I recently got memo on the basis of how much the government owes the Bank of Dominica. I think the government owes about $337 million as of June 2022. $337 million on the basis that recently St. Lucia just got a loan from Dominica's, the same bank, because they had more confidence in St. Lucia's government. So what do you think that says about the present government?
No, what that tells me is that firstly, that is a big problem. The fact that the government owes so much debt to a financial institution. Now, bear in mind, this is $347 million that you could have been on lent to businesses, to business persons. Now, the government, by borrowing so much, they're actually pushing away what we call crowding out. They're crowding out the business persons because they no longer have access to that kind of individuals? Right. So what I mean is that if the bank has, let's say the bank has $100 million to lend, they can either lend to the private sector or to government or to a combination of both. But if from that 100 million they're lending, say 90 million to government, it means they only have 10 million to lend out to the private sector. But the private sector might actually need 20 or 30 million if they really want to expand their produce, sell more overseas, employ more people. So that's what they're doing. They're pushing the private sector away. So government is getting larger and larger and the private sector is getting smaller and smaller. And that's what we're seeing in Dominica. Because if you look around, the small businesses are trying really hard to survive. Very few small businesses are expanding. Very few new businesses are coming on stream because they simply don't have access to those kind of resources because that money is going to the government. And the other thing about this huge borrowing by the government is that they're lending at commercial rates. Commercial bank rates are 10, 12, 14%. So that's a huge debt burden on the country. So it means that even in terms of the repayments that the government has to make is a huge burden on the people of Dominica because that's money that instead of now going to health and to education and to projects, building roads, probably building feeder roads to allow the farmers access, you have to use this money to repay that debt.
But do you think that is intentionally being done to keep the people down? Do you think it's, always I've tried to look at this. It just seems like it's been intentionally done.
You know, without knowing for a fact what drives them, I cannot say for certain, but you have to wonder about it. I think it's fair to wonder whether or not that is a deliberate policy to keep the people impoverished, which is what the government is doing, so that they can be assured of them, voting for them. Because one of the things that we have seen in Dominica is that when you keep Dominicans impoverished, when you keep Dominicans down, then they tend to support you more. So that might be a deliberate policy, you know. And for example, we're just listening to one guy in Portsmouth who was saying, you know, there's this gentleman who was 69 and he was looking forward to turning 70 so he can get the $300.
Yeah.
You know? So with that kind of dependency, if you come and say, well, we have a different idea, they might not want to support you because now, no, my $300 is coming up in a year's time and I want to guarantee it, you know? So I think in a lot of ways, this borrowing by the government is something that is cause for concern because it can have impact on the bank itself. Because if, for example, the government decides not to repay, or if it is late in repaying, then there are implications for depositors. Because after all, that money in the bank are the monies of depositors. Persons like you and me who put their little 1,000, their little 1,005. That is what is there.
But do you think that is why we have prices increasing in Dominica?
Well, the idea of the price increases has more to do with the fact that, well, one, you've not had a salary increase in a long time.
Yeah.
So
except the government that got their 40%. But normally in most economies, what happens is that in most businesses and the government, they match the price increases because there's a natural tendency for prices to rise over time. The only areas where prices seem to come down is in electronics, like phones, for example. As the technology improves, then the price comes down. There's that inverse relationship. But for everything else, your rice, your sugar, your gas, you know, stuff like that, it rises over time. Okay, so the question is now, as that increases, usually wages and salaries increase to match it, so you don't feel it as much. So they rise. So for example, if inflation rises at 3% on average, then every year you get a 3% increase. You are at the same place. So even if the price goes up by 3%, your salaries are by 3%. You don't really feel it because you're able to meet. What's happening to Dominica now, and why it seems that things are really out of hand, is because the same $100 you had 2 years ago, you're still getting that same $100. But those items you were buying at $20 2 years ago, they are now at $40, right? So all of a sudden, your 100 before could get to 5, you can only get to 3 of those items, right? So that is where it seems that it's even harder and a lot, you know, bigger. And the other thing to note is that Dominica imports its prices. One of the key contributors to high prices in Dominica is government policies on the port. Port charges are way too high. How do you solve that problem? If you were the government right now, how would you solve that port problem?
The first thing I would do is that I would take a look. I would have to review those port charges. Because what the government does not understand is that if you impose those high port charges, firstly, people first try to evade. They try to under invoice. They look for all kinds of ways to evade those high taxes. They come to you for duty-free concessions. And sometimes as a means of giving, you know, or patronizing them, you give duty-free concessions. But if you have what is considered to be a fair, what you call a tax regime, fair taxes, fair import duties, that is reasonable, people will pay their taxes. People will be willing to declare the real value of the goods because they know that once the real value is declared, it is not punitive. It does not punish them. So they will declare, and that way you can gain more revenues. Because now everybody is valuing, you know, at the correct value. You now have more people, more imports coming in. You have less people asking for breaks and duty free, and you can make more money that way. So I think it's just a question of re-examining this, and that is something that when we get into office, we'll be looking at. We'll take a very close look at those port charges and the taxes on the port and see how we can bring those down to make it more reasonable, you know.
No, I kind of have a love-hate relationship I don't think love on that part, more of a hate relationship for taxes. I think when you look at taxes, because I tend to understand things from the United States economy and how taxes was implemented, the 2% on the milk, that a lot of people were like, what's going on? Do you think taxes is as a result of a failing government on the basis of putting things in place? For example, we had agriculture and a number of things that were working for Dominica. And then when this went down, it had to be implemented with VAT. Because I remember when Ian Douglas said in Portsmouth, if not VAT, what else? And then we shift from VAT to CBI, and the Prime Minister will say, if not CBI, what else? So isn't taxes as a result of failed government, so to speak?
No, taxes are implemented because the idea of the taxes, the way the whole idea was kind of built up, is that it felt that you elect a government needs revenue. Okay, where are they going to get the revenue from?
I think they can get the revenue from agriculture, a number of things when you have monies coming in.
Yes, but money is coming into individuals or into businesses. But what about the government? They have to pay teachers, they have to pay, they have to build roads, they have to build airports, they have to service them and so on. So the government needs some resources. So it just felt the best way to do that is to impose to take a fraction of whatever it is that persons are getting that can then go into a common pot that the government can now use to get services and so on, you know. So the idea is not a bad idea. It is just how it is implemented. In the case of Dominica, because the government has not been able to grow the economy, then they have had to be raising taxes over and over again, or charging you more on certain things. So they impose levies by there, they impose charges by there. A good example of that is the recent $15. That is extremely arbitrary. It has nothing to do with your water consumption, you know. And the way tax is supposed to work is sometimes can be used to allow you to discriminate. So if, for example, somebody is using a lot of water and you know you don't want them to waste the water, then because of the way you set the taxes, they will pay a lot more, and then that might allow them to, or cause them to use less. But when you just impose a $15 tax on every Tom, Dick and Harry,
and 100 on the small businesses,
it makes absolutely no sense. And so what I can say to this is that the government does not have a good way of doing economic policy. It's either they don't understand it, or they don't know what they're doing, because all of those policies are extremely harmful to the individuals. A government that has, for example, over all these years not given an increase to its public servants, it means that people are demotivated. Morale is not there. I remember one time I went to an office in town. It was just about 2 minutes to 4. And people were already packing up to leave. And I was like, but it's not yet 4. And the girl just said at me, that's your business.
That's my time, I gotta go.
Time, you know. There's no motivation. People are not motivated to work because of all of this, you know. So, you know, this government has in a lot of ways contributed to the current state of what Dominica is. So services are down, services are degraded, lack of motivation, low morale, all of that is happening now because of the government policies. Failure to take care of the public servants, high wages on people, high increases. I mean, why should you be, for example, be buying a vehicle from Japan at $10,000 US, and when it gets to Dominica, it now costs you $40,000 US dollars? I mean, that makes absolutely no sense. You know, it should be a fraction. So if shipping and costs you $10,000, you should be paying a fraction of that, but be $2,000. You know, not be paying 140% of the value.
It's like you have to buy the vehicle again.
You know, plus something else, the government. You know, so that is extremely punitive. And what it does is that it discourages people. So, for example, instead of people buying a vehicle, say a 2014, 2015 model, they probably have to buy a 2000 model or 2002 model. That creates more problems for the economy, for the environment, You know, so you have those issues, and that is why government policy has to be deliberate, it has to be precise. You have to know what you are targeting and how you're going, what's the possible outcome. So what I'm saying with this government is that they have failed to have targeted policies. They're just doing things vai. Oh boy, we run out of money, we cannot pay NEP workers. How are we going to get this money? Well, let us put an extra $5 on birth papers, for example. We might get an extra $100,000 every month, you know. Okay, let's just put another $50 on the taxes for the roads. You know, that is very vai way of doing economic policy or policies.
But it seems like, based off what you say, it seems like the government is collecting a lot of money, yet still stating to the public there's not much money there.
Yeah, but you see, the problem that this government has is that it's true they're collecting a lot of money, but it's not growing as much because the economy is shrinking. You see,
but where do you think that money is going? The
collection of money, well, is going to pay, you know, you have to get, I think, $5 million every month to pay NEP workers. Remember, the NEP workers are not necessarily bringing in anything, right? Yes, they're doing some beautiful flowers on the roadside, they're keeping the side of the streets clean, but that's not generating any kind of income. So every year, every month, you have to find a $5 million somewhere. It has to come from you paying sales taxes or paying high, things on the port and so on. Right? So they are finding uses for these monies that they are getting, but they have to do more. The way you solve that issue is to grow the economy. Because if the economy is growing, more people are working, more people are paying taxes. All right, more people are buying goods and services, so VAT is going to increase. That is how you do it. But if the economy is shrinking, then you will continue to lose resources, you continue to lose revenues, and it's a kind of vicious cycle. Okay, the economy shrinks, your tax collection goes down. Now you can no longer buy medicine. That's the reason why there's no paracetamol in the hospital. All right. There are no band-aids, an issue we never had before, because government now have to prioritize. Okay, we have $1 million this month. Our total cost is 2.5 million. What do we do? Which areas do we prioritize? Well, number one priority, let's pay the public servants, because if we pay the public servants, maybe they will not go on the streets. Yeah. All right. So let's take care of the public servants. Well, the NEP workers, I can, at the stroke of a pen, I can just dismiss them. So let's leave them there for a little while, Hospital, well, let's just not order the medicines, because medicines are so expensive anyways. Yeah. Let's not do it, Well, the school needs an extra chalkboard. We can't buy a chalkboard for the school, so there is no chalkboard. So the teachers now have to put their hand in their little income that they're making to probably buy a crayon, buy something for the children, buy school supplies. And that's the situation you have in Dominica. And the fact that our people are not seeing that this government is not working for them is what is the most mind-boggling thing to me.
And that is the biggest issue I have. In my previous podcast, that's one of the questions asking. Are the people not seeing it, or are they seeing it, or just don't care?
Boy, it's hard to tell. My discussion that I've had with the people is that they are well aware, because they will tell you, bagay wed. People tell you, they're very clear in their own situation. They're seeing it. They're seeing that things are difficult. But some people have lived with this government for so long. 24 years is a long time.
Oh, yeah.
24 years is a very long time. And some people, they're not convinced that there is an alternative, which is really wrong. Yeah. Because in every other country, even within the Caribbean region, every country has had a change of government 2 or 3 times in the last 24 years. Some countries are going on 3 or 4 times, and we still have not changed ours, right? So that's one of the reasons why we are where we are.
But why do you think they believe that there's no alternative? I've heard people telling me that there's no alternative. I'm like, are you kidding me?
Yes,
we have Dr. Thomson Fontaine, not just a Dr. Thomson Fontaine, but one that is focused on the economy that can actually bring back Dominica. Why do people believe there's no alternative?
Yeah, it's a strange concept, because I hear that from people, and I try to tell them, but no, you're wrong. Because what we're seeing happening there is a fix for what is going on in Dominica. There is a fix. There is no way that the economy should be where it is. Yeah. The economy is where it is because it's government that does not understand the way the economy works. If you suddenly feel a sharp pain in your stomach, you're not going to call a carpenter. All right, you want to get to a medical doctor who can give you a good idea as to what's going on with you. It's just like the economy. If the economy is such and is so critical, you want to get somebody in there who understands. And that's the mistake I think Prime Minister Skerrit did. He should never have been finance minister.
I agree.
Because he does not understand the economy. He had no training. It might seem simple, but it is complicated. Because you have to understand how policies work. You have to understand what is the spin-off. If you do a certain policy, you must be able to evaluate what is the impact of it 5-10 years down the road. He does not have this capability. And at the same time, not only did he not have that ability, but I felt he did not surround himself sufficiently with people who could give him the kind of advice that was important. And I think that's a major failing of this Prime Minister. And what we have now is a consequence of that. A carpenter tried to work on your stomach.
Even with that sentiment that you mentioned, I remember when the Prime Minister took out the Health Minister to put him in finance. And we have the Health Minister presently who is an engineer. And then I don't know what Melissa is, but apparently she's in something that the engineer should be in. What I don't know. That's probably a far-fetched question to ask. But what do you think the Prime Minister was thinking?
It is part of the baffling behavior of the Prime Minister, because you really should get people in there who understand the particular field, the particular area. Yeah. I mean, Dr. McIntyre is a good doctor, but does he really understand economics? I don't think so. Because part of the idea of leading is that when your people come to you with certain views, You have to be able to differentiate which of these are good, which of these are not. All right, and if you don't understand, you might easily go for the view that is probably not the one you should have gone to in the first place. So you have a lot of that happening, I think. You know, if you have a minister of health who does not understand that there is a certain supply chain issue, if you want to get the medicines, there is a way it is done, so that if the staff is not doing it, you can ask those questions. You can pull up and say, well, you know, I understand that that needed to be done. There is a supply chain. Here's how we need to get our medicines in. But if you don't know the kind of questions to ask, people can fall asleep on the job, and you get the consequences of what we have in Dominica. So this idea of these large number of square pegs in those round holes is what we have in Dominica, and that is within our country.
And it seems like there's some sort of brain drain that is taking place as a result of that very thing. Yeah. Because I remember I had a number of friends I went to school who were nurses, like about 4 or 5 of them. And none of them are in Dominica today.
Yeah. Our nurses that's our number one export, I'm told. We exported nurses faster than you can export a grain of banana. All right, and it's because, you know, they get trained. They're usually qualified. Good quality education is very easy. They have been swallowed up very easily in America, in the UK, and so on, because there is a great demand for them, and even the Caribbean region. You know, so there is a consequence. We are paying a price for failure to put in place good policy, and failure to have the right persons in the right places, and above all, a policy that cares for the people. You know, if you care deeply about the population, there are certain things that you must do to ensure that this population is taken care of. You know, and I have not seen that level of caring. You know, one thing that we have seen is that this government has done a lot in terms of a few persons benefiting, you know, with a lot of wealth,
the oligarchs, and
then you have the overwhelming majority really going, they're really struggling to make ends meet, and that really should not be. It should be the other way around, you know. And you have countries. I know one country recently, the president ordered one. I think it was Malawi. He ordered that all of the governments take a huge salary cut, because when he looked at the government salaries compared to what the public servants is getting, he said, no, that makes no sense. He cut their salaries. In Dominica, government looks at what is happening and they raise it by 30%, and nothing goes to the public servant. So it's a different dynamic. You know, if you care about the people, you will put policies in place. If you care about the people of Dominica, you would not keep millions of dollars outside, or even billions of dollars outside of Dominica's economy. You would not entrust that kind of money to one man. You would make sure that this money comes into the treasury. So I think it's just a situation where our people have not demanded enough from the government, and they've simply gone along and just left the people behind.
And I think on the basis of the very salary dilemma that we're talking about, the government has increased their salaries. And you would say, okay, they increased their salaries. Why? Are they doing the work? I think government should be paid based on the merits that they produce in the economy.
Yes.
You supply them, hey, you want to get gas for your vehicle? Sure, we have a per diem or whatever for you guys. But if you're creating merit, you're creating income into the country, then you get paid for it. That's how I think the government should run. Because if the government is doing nothing, and it seems like, well, I've heard different individuals saying that it seems like the head government is telling those who are at the bottom to do nothing for the constituency. I've heard individuals, especially in Mao, complaining with their power reps, and the power reps are telling them that they're not their God. So, I mean, if I'm putting you in positions to do things for me and you're not doing it, why are you getting a salary increase in the first place? No, that's one thing. You mentioned the NEP earlier, that came to mind. You said that the NEP is not producing output. How would you solve that problem?
Well, how I would solve that problem is I would redo the NEP program. Notice I said redo, not get rid of. People have been saying that we'll get rid of the NEP program. I believe that the key thing, the way that program should be restructured, is to have persons learning a skill set. I think you can have persons, you can redo the program in such a way that these young people, especially persons who have gone to high school, who have probably gone to the state college, allow them to learn something that later on they can, whether it's carpentry, whether it's masonry, whether it's joinery, whether it is, you know, anything that they can learn some type of skill. that you'll be able to spin off later on. Okay, so that NAP will be a temporary program for them. It will be turned into a temporary, if you like, skill set, or temporary school, if you like, where they learn tasks and then they move on. Because bear in mind, you are spending $5 million without output, right? So if you can spend that $5 million on training people, you'll have an output 2-3 years down the road.
Yeah.
Some of those resources as well, I would have them employed in a different capacity. I have them employed, for example, in some factory, probably factory doing agro processing, where they can bring in revenues to the state, and we can tax and make more money on. So there's a lot of things that can be done, but in its current form, it will certainly have to change. It will certainly have to change.
And on the basis of trying to do something, I think agriculture is the way forward in Dominica. You recently had a conference, the Dominica Economic Revival Summit. Was that the focus of trying to bring back Dominica to how it was, utilizing, I think you mentioned something of TEDVOC. So utilizing the skill set of what is known as the NEP workers to actually have a new skills so they can go into different fields that can actually elevate. So Can you tell me a little bit more about the Economic Revival Summit?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's exactly what we're trying to do with this summit. We're trying to focus on areas of the economy that we believe can create jobs. Good paying jobs, so that we can have people employed in those areas. So one of the areas that we looked at and we are very excited about is the knowledge industries. Dominicans, for example, know about the call centers, where you have people working here in Dominica, but they're working for companies in the United States. All right. Now the call centers are at the very end of that knowledge industry, but there are other areas that you can work. For example, you can be employing accountants. A business, for example, can employ Dominicans to do their invoicing. So somebody asks, for goods and services, for example, Amazon, and you could have Dominicans doing the invoicing for that and following up on the customer to make sure that this amounts are paid. Yeah. We can do that because we speak the language and we have good connectivity in Dominica. So we have already the key ingredients for setting up a knowledge-based industry in Dominica. So that's one area we're looking at. Working online. Okay. Working online. Imagine yourself on the beach, for example, sipping some juice. I was about to say some rum punch, but if you're working, you should not be sipping rum punch. But just in a very casual setting, but you're working, you're contributing towards something. So that's one area that we have identified that we want to work. We have certainly want to put a lot of effort into. The other area, of course, is agriculture. Okay, how do we get people back to working? But this time we want to do agriculture, not just producing goods to export the raw material. I think that is good, but I don't want to be exporting plantain to Antigua for $1 a pound, and Antigua then transforms this plantain into $8 a pound. No. Why can't I get the $8 a pound for that plantain here in Dominica? So you have to do agriculture in a way that's a lot smarter, that allows you to use this earth that we have that grows any and everything that we want, use it in a way that we can generate a lot of resources, and that is where the focus has to be. And that's why I said using resources to build factories, to focus on our water resources. For example, we have so much water. Why can't we get this water out to the other islands? Why can't we have again be producing beer or other drinks that are water-based drinks that you need water as a key ingredient in that, or key component of that. So that's that. Then even in the area of manufacturing, there's so much that can be done. So the economic conference allowed us to take a very close look at some of the key sectors of the economy where we can benefit from. We also looked at the entertainment industry. That's one of the key sector. We have a unique brand of music. We are pioneers in Canas. Then we have Bouillon. Now we have another one more recently. All right? I can't remember his name now.
I myself doesn't know what it is, but yeah.
So it shows a certain level of creativity.
Oh, I think I know what you're talking about. No, I catch it. Starts with N.
It has, you don't want to be selling that, but anyway, it is what it is. It has its people. It has its. But the point to make there is that you have a product that you can make money out of. We have to find a way to make money for the young people. So. That the music industries that we talk about, the grain, the blue industry. In fact, today I was talking to a young fisherman right there in Portsmouth, and he was talking about the amount of fish that they bring in. Sometimes I met a fisherman in it was in St. Joseph, in Mero, Layu, in Layu. And he was saying he's praying to God that they don't get the fish as plentiful as they normally do. Can you imagine? He's saying that he does not want as much fish because when they do that, it's for them they don't make money because they have to give the fish away. People don't have money to buy it and so on. And he's praying to God. That's his living. He's been doing that for years and years and years. And yet his prayer to God is that they don't get as much fish.
Because the people don't have spending power.
People don't have spending power, and it's a way. So why can't we develop an industry that allows us to can, for example, to can those fish, the excess fish? Why don't we have a situation where we can have our fishermen not just fish for one day, but be on the sea for 3-4 days, because you have commercial type fishing. These are the areas that we need to go into. These are the areas that we need to push into. So we're able to look at all of those areas during the conference, and what we have done with that is we're beginning to put together a plan. But for us to be able to implement that in full, we will need the support of the Dominican public. We have to be in office. The public of Dominica has to put the United Workers' Party in office so we can pursue those things. There are some things that we can do, though, in the meantime. I talked about the knowledge industry. We don't have to be in office to begin to explore this. So that's what we're doing. We are trying to put together a core group of Dominicans here and overseas who understand the way this works, who can possibly get some link into that area and be able to help create some jobs. So that's something that we're hoping that we can do in a very quick fashion to begin to put Dominicans to work, because that is what we need to do. We need to put Dominicans to work with good paying jobs.
Now, one of the things that I remember when I was at the award ceremony at the Economic Revival Summit, and I remember you breaking down slightly, you were trying to keep yourself when you mentioned the youth. What was going through your mind at that particular time?
It was very raw. It was still very fresh, because for the past, almost 3 weeks, I've been going around all over Dominica, and every community is a repeat. It's like deja vu. We've been there before. We've seen that. We've seen that movie. We've heard that script before, and the common theme is the young people, because every single community, there are young people who are just there wasting away, and it is extremely heartbreaking when you see persons who should be dreaming. Young people. There is something about there's a saying we used to have that beauty is youth. When you're young, that is when you are at the you can conquer the world. You feel as a young person that anything is possible. That's the age that people dream. And if you are denied that ability to dream, there's a very good chance you will amount to very little or nothing in your entire life. So when I see that, when I was beginning to talk about it, and I could see it was a visual image of the young men in particular that we had met. Some of them with a joint dangling from the mouth, but without any not knowing what to do next, where to go. The frustration levels and so on. Some say they don't want to work in NEP. They find it's, why would they want to after going to school? I met this guy tell me he has CXC passes in math and all of these subjects that normally you can do something, you can contribute to our society. He said, but here I am, I can't even help my mother. He said, I can't even do anything for my mother, who has helped me so much in my life. So all of that pressure that was what I was kind of seeing, because in my head it was almost a replay. So I was talking to the people there, yes, but I was thinking of those conversations, and you cannot be human and not be moved by those kinds of things, and especially in a country like Dominica, where there is so much that can be done. I work in Africa. It's a different problem because you have the issue of overpopulation. You have millions and millions of people, and sometimes to create jobs. So all of this is a problem. But in Dominica, you just need to create about 20, 25,000 good jobs, and that's not a lot. That is not a lot. If you can, you put a couple of factories together, you go into, as we said, your canning. You have a lot more persons employed in that area in the fishing industry. You have the essential oils where people are using the oils to make products. You have persons now, young people doing the marketing, looking for markets. Doing the computer work. You go into knowledge industries. You can create in a very quick order. You can create those thousands of jobs. But our government has not done that, and that is what we offer differently. I think that is what we are able to offer to the Dominican public. The opportunity to create jobs, the opportunity to put young people to work, and it starts with having a heart for the young people. If all you see when you look at them is a vote, then you've already started off wrongly. When I look at the young people, I see persons with potential. I see myself, as I said, I was there, playing whoop-say, playing cowboy and thing. They're not even playing that again. They're not even playing that again because life is so, life is not that joyous. Freedom that we had growing up, and so you kind of feel for them because they, as young people, they deserve to dream. They deserve to be able to do things for themselves and their families. A lot of these boys probably want to have girlfriends, and they probably cannot afford to even take them for a drink, or they could sit down dinner. Those things. When you're a young person, you want to be able to do that. And the country should be able to offer you that. And so we have a lot of work to do. But at the end of the day, it is not rocket science. It is not impossible. What it calls for is a heart for the young people, a heart for persons, and doing necessary things. Government policy that will drive all of those, what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I remember growing up, and a number of individuals used to do better than me in school. And I'm looking back at those times and seeing them at present. I'm like, what went wrong? Some of these guys never went into drugs, none of that stuff. They just there. People with bright minds, they just there. Nothing is happening for them.
Away,
Those who can leave. I remember speaking to a number of high school students. Well, when I was in high school with the high school students, and certain things I would state to them based off what looks like a trend. How bad Dominica is gonna fall. Some of them used to laugh me and tell me what I say. You don't see everything going nice and dandy. Today, these very people, when they meet me, well, some of them left, but those who met me when I used to talk, they say, Mr. Ligsby, I should have listened to you back in high school. Because the trend that was happening, I mean, yes, give the young man a chance, this city. Give the young man a chance. You're trying to see what the young man did for the youth. There's nothing to show.
Nothing, absolutely.
Literally nothing to show. And then you come back again because he's young. He would do things. That's one of the reasons why in the previous podcast that I had, I was stating, yes, you say give the young people a chance, but the young people have to be ready to take that chance. If they're not, then it's going to be chaos. Like what is happening today.
Yes, exactly.
Now, on the basis, you mentioned something I found rather interesting. You mentioned the oils. I think the oil is a good thing. And it has pertaining to health. It's pretty much linked to health. We consider ourselves to be the nature isle of the Caribbean, but we don't seem to be focused on health. Why aren't we looking into herbal remedies? Is that something that, if you were in government, that's something you would want to?
Yeah, absolutely. This area, the herbal industry is key for us because I think in terms of the variety of herbs that we have in the country, I mean, even marijuana, for example, we're not even using marijuana. Countries are making billions, millions of dollars out of marijuana. And I'm told that we have a very special grade here in Dominica that is highly valued for its medicinal, thing. So, but we should find a way to get that on the market. But besides the marijuana, you have the other spices. You have the bay leaf, for example. But beyond that, you have the other drinks. I just had a very nice spearmint tea from Jamaica, and it tastes almost like it's fresh from the thing. Because why can't we do that? Why can't we be putting our stuff into tea bags and exporting all over the world? So there is just a lot of scope, a lot of opportunity in that particular area because we have the fresh herbs, we have the fresh spices. and their ways of doing stuff, oils, different things for your hair products. There's a whole range of things that can be done and should be done with what we have. And we have the land for it. We have the ability to plant those things and to make money out of it. It's just a matter of getting our act together. All right, getting our act together to make sure it happens. And that is where our focus is. We are going to look. We are looking around and saying, what do we have in Dominica that can allow us to stand out? What do we have in Dominica that can allow us to do things that can help create wealth? Because that, after all, is what we're after. How do we create wealth for the people? How do we get money in the economy? How do we get money into the hands of the people? And I'm not talking about $300 a month.
Yeah.
I'm talking about real money, that people can work, people can take vacations, that kind of thing. And that is where our focus is. But we have it. The herbs are there in abundance. We can grow it. We can grow new species. We can do the research, all that. But
why you think the government is not doing anything in that regard?
Because, as I said earlier, the government does not care about the people. I mean, I professionally say it that way, but to me, that's the reality. If you care about people, you will do everything in your power to take care of them, right? Because you care about them. If you care about your family members, you'll make sure that they have dinner. You'll make sure that they have what they need. But if you don't care about them, you will not worry whether or not they eat or whether or not they drink, and that's what we have in government.
But should we put the blame fully on the government? Because it's still the people that voting for the government. So in that same high side where you made the claim that the government doesn't care about the people, do the people care about their own self?
Well, that is true, and that's something we have to look at closely. But bear in mind, again, the government has been stealing the elections. I talk about the cheating legacy that they have. Nobody can deny that government won the last two elections, not the 2022 one, but the 19 and 14 election by bringing people in. I was a victim of it in my own constituency. Bringing in 200 persons into La Plaine and losing by 14 votes, or the opposition losing by 14 votes. So that has been there. So in a way, if you are to look to blame, I would probably blame persons who are coming in to make up those numbers. Because whether you like it or not, there will be some people, like we met this lovely lady in Portsmouth today that says, but I'm a Labourite, I love my Labour Party, and so you always have those people, right, that love their Labour Party, that will vote them regardless, right? But I think in terms of the majority, my own sense is that the majority of Dominicans for a few years now have not been supportive of this government. And his government has been maintained through the importation of persons overseas. So I think they're the ones that are responsible. So in a way, you cannot be too, because people cannot be so hating of themselves. All right?
You sure?
Probably I'm wrong.
People can, trust me. Because I'm thinking of history, certain things that happened in history. I remember Harriet Tubman made a sentiment that she freed hundreds of slaves and could have freed thousands more if only they knew that they were slaves. You mean you're working for somebody, they're beating your brother, and you literally going against?
Yes. It's
interesting.
It's true. And it's a mindset that sometimes we have. I'm talking about black people. And you're right. Sometimes people don't see that they're being abused. They don't see that they're missing out. They don't appreciate that they can do different, and so again, it comes back again to us educating them, trying our best to let them know what is going on and what they should be doing.
Okay. Now, on the basis of men, now oftentimes we hear politicians talking about women and children and the youth, but it seems like the men are neglected. But if you look at society itself, I remember in the previous podcast we were trying to figure out what we were saying is strong men create strong societies. Strong societies create weak men in the long run because they are lackadaisical, the work has been done, they are relaxed, and then weak men create weak societies that create chaos in the place. So what can be done to help the men of society?
Well, the number one thing is to create opportunities. I was lamenting a while ago about the young men, not the young women, because the numbers you see are the men. The women could be indoors, but at least those you meet out on the street are the men. And I believe the way you can do that is by empowering them. You have to empower these young men.
How?
By creating opportunities for them. It should be a rite of passage, right? That you're born, you go to school, you get a job, or you start your own business, but you become a productive member of society.
Yeah.
But these opportunities have to be created for you, because you might not have been born into a family that has a lot. So you have to create those opportunities. But to create those opportunities, there must be the environment for it. And that's where the government comes in. Government is the one that should be creating that environment to allow these young men to step into. So what we need to do really in Dominica is to create opportunities for our young men.
I remember when Suki, I'm not sure if you remember Suki. It seems like Suki just vanished from the face of the earth. But when Suki was the big thing in society, one of the things that people were trying to say, are there any rehabilitation centers? Are there anything of that sort to help him? I remember when he went, I think they brought him to Guadeloupe to get him some help before he went to St. Martin to perform or something like that. And it seems like throughout society in Dominica, I remember seeing a quote-unquote madman, what I consider madman, in St. Joseph. He was making noise, just going up and down the place, and the police had to go for him to bring him inside. Now I was speaking to the police there, and I was like, okay, so what help is he receiving? They said they bring him to the psychiatric unit. Ask them what's going on there. Nothing seems to be happening because he has been back and forth in the psychiatric unit. So when it comes down to men and the mental health aspect of it, how do you help the men to become great men of society? Because especially you mentioned, yes, creating jobs is one thing, but if the mental is not there, I mean, it's society is still going to crumble.
Yeah, you're right. And in fact, the other day I was thinking about this, and I was wondering why it is that you appear to have a disproportionate number of men having mental issues. Now, I'm not I don't pretend to know anything about mental health in terms of the science behind it. But it seems to me that men take the pressures of societies more to themselves. They have less of an ability to cope, because it could be that, and that's just what I'm thinking. It's possible that men are supposed to be the ones providing, all right? They're supposed to be the providers of society, and you get to a point where you're not able to do that. You're so frustrated that your frustration becomes stress, and your stress then becomes a mental issue, all right? And it has to be something wrong that is going on, and that's why we see. So there is need for a lot of mental health counseling. There is need again for embracing our men. We absolutely have to do that. And giving them opportunities, because again it comes back to dreaming. If you cannot dream, then you become a recluse. You begin to worry and so on, and then all of the chemicals that are generated. Probably it would be a good thing. It would be a good thing to have a discussion probably with a mental health person to explain, to help us understand that phenomenon. Because what we observe is that there are more men who appear to be in that category than there are women. It could be that women are just more resilient. They can take more pressure, and they are not as probably as outwardly open about their own pressures. Because I'm sure women are going through a lot of pressures as well in this society.
When you look across the world, it seems like there's more help for women than men.
Yeah, that's true. And then the other thing that you have to note as well is that women in Dominica are doing a lot better academically. You have a lot more women who go to sixth form to the state college. A few weeks ago, I was helping a lecturer grade a particular class, and I think we were grading probably like 10 kids, and 8 of them were women and just 2 boys. And I'm told that is about the ratio that you have throughout the school. So it looks like the women have a lot more opportunities academically. And so if they have more opportunities, then they're the ones who get the jobs first compared to the men. Or men are dropping out apparently at high school a lot more than the women are.
Could it be that the men don't care about academics? I mean, back in the day, I had stuff like TEDVOC, where we mentioned doing trade and these kind of things there, and that seems to have vanished. So do you think that is as a result of men finding interest in more their hands versus in academics, and then the ability for them to utilize their hands, the training is not there, and therefore there's a level of stress that adds to this?
So that's where the tech work becomes critical, because not everybody can excel academically. You have varying degrees of being able to do academics. So the ability to have tech work where people can learn a trade, become a tradesman, a plumber, or mason, an electrician, having that as a separate avenue or option is probably men who could do mechanic, for example. That is important, and we've seen that in the past. When that was in place, you had a lot less issues in society with for men. But now they no longer have those opportunities. It means if you can't do the academics, you're basically out, and that's a problem.
Well, why was it removed though?
Well, that again, it boils down to policy. I mean, how could you just stop a tech VOC program? I'm told if you go up to the state college, you can see machinery and so on rotting out there. The stuff to do the joinery and so on. It is all there. So again, it boils back to a deliberate government policy and what exactly is the government invested in, what exactly are they giving priority.
No, one of the things I know, I mean, some of the things that you stated, well, pretty much all the things you stated right there, song spot on, but you definitely need to have a team behind you. And one of the things we tend to see a number of you guys, I don't think we see all of you guys. Can you give me an idea of the amount of people within your team that you have and those who tend to do the work? I know Monel is there, I know Ronald Charles is there, I know a number of them are there, but can you tell us, because we see you, we see Lennox, we see a number of individuals, but can you tell us the amount of individuals that are part of your team that actually are with you on that?
Okay,
that
so what we try to do as a party is we try to get what we call a caretaker in the various constituencies. Okay, where this caretaker will be more or less almost like not necessarily the candidate, but they could be the candidate, all right, to run in the election. So that's a caretaker. And then for each of those constituencies, we try to do what we call a constituency association, where again we get a small group, probably 5-6 people, with a president, a treasurer, and so on, that can work with the party. So in theory, we should have at least 10 persons as a team working in each constituency. 10 by 21, at least 200 people. Okay, but what you find is that it does not always work that way. So there are some people who have more time than others. So for example, there's some people that I can count on because they probably have their own business, or they're probably not employed at the time, and they can come, they can do certain things. There are others who, by virtue of where they are working, they do not want to show their face. So the numbers vary. But what I've seen is a lot of commitment from those that work with us. They're committed. They give up their time voluntarily. It's not something that they are being paid for. It's something that they're doing voluntarily. And it's something that we certainly encourage and are happy and thankful for.
Can you give us some of their names? I mean, sometimes individuals might to know, okay, where's that person? Who is that person within my community? Can you give us some names?
Yes, I mean, you have, well, that's the other issue. One thing about naming names is that you would miss. You could miss.
No, I'm not asking for all of them. You can just name some so that individuals who listening might say, okay, let me see if I can hit up that person, to liaison with that person. Yeah.
Okay,
so it's not all for everybody. It's not all, but just give somebody.
Yes. So for example, in my own constituency, we have Augustus Luis. Okay. And everybody know him as Knowlton Tinam. These are people that are constantly there with us, working with us. In Laplane, you have Sika, Francisca Joseph, who is there, very much a part of that. And there are a couple other people in Laplane that have been working with her. So Sika and her team is there in the Daly's constituency. Then if you look at the Wesley constituency, you have Dr. McDonald Thomas and persons like Steve Benjamin, for example, in that constituency that are there working along with him. In the South, because everyone knows Sparks is in the South, in the South constituency that is doing. Then if we go to the Roseau South constituency, we have a few individuals there again working who prefer to work behind the scenes. Again, they're doing what they need to do. They are not public.
But how would people be able to find those?
Well, you see, okay, because of the way the society is structured, because of the way our politics is in Dominica. They can do certain things. They can do it in a very low key. So if, for example, I go to Roseau South right now, they will not join me to go knock on doors, all right? Because they don't want to be publicly seen doing this.
They want to be
but
victimized.
on their own, because they want to be victimized, but on their own they will do it. So we have people in each of the constituencies, we have persons like that. Persons who are working but who do not want to reveal themselves publicly because of the victimization that we have in Dominica.
Is that a good thing though? I mean, if you're trying to make change, because sometimes people meet me and say, Mr. Lick, say this for me. I say, okay, well, make a video or something. Let me react to it. You know?
And then what they will say, they'll say no, right? They're afraid to do it.
So it's like, if anything has to happen, I will be the one to take the hit for it, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, is that a good thing though? I mean, when people...
Well, it's not the best. I mean, what happens is that closer to elections, that fear is removed, because especially if they believe that you stand a good chance of winning, people are more prepared to take chances. But that far out for an election cycle is usually a bit more difficult.
I heard there's an election this year. There might be an election this year.
Yeah, but why would there be an election 2 years after last election?
Well,
that was cut short.
Same thing happened last time. So there's a possibility. Do you think that's going to happen? Plus, remember, the Prime Minister is trying to implement, well, from our knowledge, he's trying to implement his electoral reform.
Yeah.
Utilizing the
I thought he was committed to that. I thought he was saying that we're going to have electoral reforms. And then elections. But I did not expect us to have elections before electoral reforms, because that's what we have been asking for all along. And the Prime Minister appeared to be giving that commitment that he will have electoral reforms. So it's interesting to hear that there may be elections before the end of this year, which is...
But the Prime Minister keeps saying that electoral reform will happen before elections, and it happened twice. So should we believe him when he says...
It's hard to believe the Prime Minister, because he changes and he doesn't always tell us exactly what is going on. But you have to wonder why. Why would he want to push through an election when you were elected the last time with a 19-2 majority? You can do any kind of legislative agenda that you want, you know. Now is the time to do things for the country, to build the country. So if you come back, what are you asking for again? You're asking for another mandate to do what you have just been given the mandate for? I don't understand it.
Or it could be that the Prime Minister wants to have elections again on the new electoral reform, because remember, OAS was there observing concerning what CCJ had stated already. So if he does push the electoral reform through, he will be like, okay, well, you see, I am voted back again with new electoral reform.
No, but he cannot claim that, for the very simple reason, the electoral reform is not just the legislation. Electoral reform is the legislation that's the first step. So electoral reform means you go to Parliament with legislation, and then you implement that legislation. So you do the voter ID card, for example. Because if you go to elections now, there's still no voter ID cards, right? If you go to elections now, there is still the old voters list. So that's not electoral reform. Electoral reform means a clean voters list, a voter ID card, access to DBS radio, because it's only now it's going into the legislation.
But that doesn't seem to be part of what the new thing is.
Yes, it is. In the new legislation, there is equal access to DBS radio.
So can you tell us a little bit about what is part of the electoral reform that is being proposed?
So, among the main things that we have been asking for is access to DBS radio, equal access to DBS radio. That is in the legislation. And we have also been asking for voter ID cards. That is also in the legislation.
But the Prime Minister is like, he doesn't want that.
But it is in the legislation.
Okay.
It is in the draft legislation, so that everybody will be issued, whether you reconfirm or you register for the first time, you will be issued a voter ID card. So that is good. Okay. What is not in the legislation is a clear track to cleansing the voters list. Okay, the legislation calls for a confirmation process, but as I explained earlier, that confirmation process is just you signing a form saying that you're that person on the list, and then your name remaining there on the list. So I would like to see a clearer approach to cleansing that voters list. The other thing that is not in the legislation is the residency criteria. Okay, where in the past legislation, or in the current one, because this is not yet changed, in the current one, you have to be ordinarily resident in Dominica during that 5-year period if you're going to keep your name on the voters registration. That is now removed. So there is no requirement. So for example, if you register now, you can be away for 10, 15 years and still remain on the list. So to me, that should be changed. Yeah.
Wouldn't a solution to this be, I actually mentioned that sometime, having an outside constituency, so to speak. So the individuals who are outside, they get to vote in that constituency. And then in doing so, I remember a particular individual told me that Rosie Douglas also had that sentiment, but he wanted 2 constituencies. So wouldn't, hey, everybody want to vote you from Dominica, that's fine. Don't you think having 2 constituencies for the overseas voters would help in alleviating that issue?
You know, that was one of the recommendations that were put forward by some individuals because they felt that the diaspora population should be a part of the voting process, but not in the way it is. And that was one of the solutions that was suggested, that you can have them vote, but they would vote for a
particular constituency.
Yeah. The problem about that though is how do you do it? You know, because unless you have electronic voting where people can vote on their computers, it may be a problem because you'd have to organize voting stations in every constituency where there are overseas Dominican voters. Now, if you put, for example, a voting place in Florida, but you said, well, okay, there are only 100 people in Alaska, we will not put one there. You immediately begin to disenfranchise them. So the actual technical aspect of it would be difficult to do.
Or just doing it digitally.
Well, that is one. That's one possibility. If it's done, so everybody has an equal chance. But then you have to be able to vet it. You have to be able to vet that the people who are voting are in fact the persons who are registered to vote. So
maybe
it has its own challenges.
Making sure that they have their voter ID cards as well.
Yeah, but then how? But then who is going to? You know, how are you going to organize it? You see, it's just a question of the logistics that would be difficult.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I am not sure if I'm correct in saying this, but I've heard this on the streets that there seems to be some sort of strife within the party versus you or Lennox, Linton. Is that within the party or is that the outside people speaking?
I think it's the outside people speaking. The fact of the matter is you're in a party with a number of persons with different views. Not everybody agrees with everything I say, neither do I agree with everything others say. So there is a healthy debate, and people fail to understand that in a democracy, that's what you have. You have people with different views. The point of the matter is we are working together, and you will see that tomorrow. In fact, we're having a press conference tomorrow on electoral reform at 11 o'clock. You will see the members of the executive present at this press conference. You know, so it's not something where we are divided. We certainly agree to disagree sometimes, but we are working together because we understand that our problem is not amongst us. Our problem is to get rid of this government and to put a better governance system in place for Dominica.
Okay. What do you think about the new parties that seem to be coming up? I mean, we've heard of, quote-unquote, Alex Bruno Party. We've heard of the one he did before, and then we're hearing this new one that is coming up.
You mean the one by Joshua Francis?
Yes. What do you think about these parties coming up?
The Orange Party.
The bottle.
You know, we're in a democracy. Okay, let me start that way. We are in a democracy, and part of that democracy is that anyone who can pay the $50 for registration can register to be a political party. So you don't want to discourage anyone from doing that. Okay. However, having said that, now I believe, given the history of our politics, given the fact we have had a government in place for 24, 25 years, what is required now for everybody who opposes that government to work together? So while I'm not against a political party being formed, it is my view that this political party must find a way to work with the opposition together so that we don't split the opposition vote. It is very important we don't split the opposition vote because these are marginal. I mean, all with the exception of probably 2-3 constituencies, all of them are marginal. By that I mean people win by 10 votes, people win by 3 votes, by 14 votes. You know, so these are marginal constituencies, which means that voters can go. And by the way, the same year I lost by 2 votes, there was a Freedom Party candidate who got 15 votes. So he split that 15 votes. This is a vote against the government, but he did not come to me. It went to the Freedom Party candidate.
And I think that's the big issue right here.
So it means that when you have a third party it could distort. So that same party that think they're opposing the government, they might actually be helping the government.
Yeah.
Because all they need to do is to take 10, 15 votes, and that constituency could remain with the government.
Yeah. Is there, we kind of go, but is there any last words you want to say in conclusion with what has been taking place in Dominica? What are your thoughts? What is next for you? Can you just give us?
Yeah, sure. My concern continues to be for the state of Dominica. The state, by that I mean the state of our young people, the state of the economy. The fact that even at this late moment, the Prime Minister is trying to manipulate the electoral reform process. I don't understand this. I think the Prime Minister should, in all fairness, be looking to have some kind of legacy, and he can find it in electoral reform. What he needs to do is to set the basis for free and fair elections well into the future, long after all of us are gone. This country can continue to exercise its economic, its political election freedom in that sense. Right? So that's what I would like to see. I would like to see persons becoming more involved in what's going on in their constituencies and taking a greater interest, and basically piling on more pressure on this government. Because if the government believes that they're going to lose a lot more people, they may do something. They may try to do something to help the situation. I would like to see a lot more emphasis placed on our young people, on creating jobs and opportunities for our young people. But I'm not totally pessimistic. I believe that we are in a good place. The conversations that we have been having with the people all across Dominica is extremely encouraging. People are desirous of change. Before, we really want saying change is a must. It's just coming from the party. Now, I no longer say it because I'm hearing it so often from the people on the ground that we need change. It is time for change. Let us change this. We are tired. People agree with the Haitians that pay a tombe. And because the country has fallen, they're seeing the United Workers' Party as a good alternative to this. And that is where the whole idea of alternative comes up, because we are offering ourselves. And I want to thank you, of course, for that opportunity, because it's one way to reach the young people in particular. You have a very popular vlog. They may not listen to me if I do something on TV, but they will listen to you. They will tune into you. So I think it's something that we need to continue to encourage persons to do. And we need to continue to put a lot more effort in doing the work on the ground. Because at the end of the day, I'm of the firm belief that the elections are won or lost based on what you do on the ground and your interaction with the people on the ground.
Before we leave, there's one more thing I have to ask. It seems like a lot of us tend to focus on putting our trust in human beings. What do you think God plays in this factor?
Wow, that's a good question. I believe I honestly believe that your number one priority should be towards God. That anything that you do is God. I owe my existence to God. I owe everything that I have accomplished. Because when I think about it, when I think that, as I told you earlier about my application to the IMF, when I think that out of 4,000 persons who applied that year, when 30 were selected, and I was one of that 30. Okay, I said, well, yeah, I tried and knew a little thing in school, but it had to be an intervention from God.
Definitely.
Things happen in your life that tells you that there is a God. So for me, that's very important, that personal relationship, knowing God, understanding who God is, understanding how He can work in your life is very important, and having that manifestation. If you fear God, you have a different way of dealing with your neighbor. All right. If you fear God, if you know that there are consequences to your actions in the eyes of God, you then your behavior becomes different. You can just diss people, you can just walk over people, you can just disrespect people, because you understand that they are creatures of God as well. And so the idea of God and having that as a guide, I think, is very important, and it's something that I don't take lightly. And I think that Dominica is supposedly Christian nation, and there are people who pray, and there are a number of persons who meet and tell you they're praying for you and so on. That I welcome that, because it's either that side or you're on the dark side, and the dark side is certainly not for me. It's the side of light.